Hello, good morning, folks, or good afternoon, or something else, depending on where you're joining us from. But thank you so much for being here for harnessing the power of assessments in coaching. We are so excited to have you here. It's not just the coffee. I think we're genuinely abuzz and excited for this topic. So my name is Lucy Sullivan, and I'm going to be just your host today. And before we begin, I'll do a very quick bit of housekeeping. I think everybody is quite well acquainted with Zoom by now, but just a few little tips. We are recording today's webinar, so you'll get a link to the recording, to the slides. We do a blog post that has a great summary of a lot of what we covered. We'll also do Q&A in there, so anything we didn't get to on the broadcast will be in there. So keep an eye out for your follow-up materials. We also have some really rich follow-up materials coming in this one as well. To stay focused during the webinar, we do have the chat closed and cameras are off, but we absolutely want to hear from you. So just pop any questions you have into the Q&A as they come. I'll get those. We'll take them at the Q&A breaks, and any that we don't get to, we will answer them offline. And as I said, we'll put them in that MRG blog so you can see other people's questions. And we usually get a pretty good discussion going there. So please just pop things in as they come to you, because we really look forward to hearing your questions. So I'll give you a quick introduction of who MRG is, since some of you may be new to us. So we're a global leader in designing assessments that impact people in profound and meaningful ways. And we have assessments for leadership, for motivation, personal development, sales. We've been supporting coaches in this space with assessments for it's almost 40 years now. We work really closely with our network of coaches, and we do coaching ourselves. So we're very, very steeped in the space. The assessments are driven by research. They're designed to foster self-awareness and really encourage lasting growth. And they're being used by thousands of coaches and certified practitioners all over the world in more than 100 countries. So your presenter today is none other than Trisha Naddaff. She's the president of MRG, and also one of the only people I know who would be delighted to be spending her birthday presenting a webinar. So I promise I won't sing. I will fight the urge. But she is also our birthday girl today. Trisha has been working with individuals, teams, organizations for more than 30 years herself in consulting and coaching, product design, research, all of these spaces. So we are excited to have her knowledge and sharing her experience with us. She's shared her research around the world. You might have seen her at things like ATD, SCP, Society for Consulting Psychology. She's done TEDx talks. Might have seen her articles in ATD's magazine. So she has a lot to share with us, and I'm going to let her start sharing it. We have some happy birthday messages in the chat. The Q&A was blowing up. I was like, what have I done? So anyway, Trisha, I will let you get on with it. Thanks.
Thank you for the birthday wishes. That's very sweet of you. I am very excited today. Actually, I was just telling Stacy, I was at the theater this weekend, and I was introduced to actually a psychiatrist, and she asked me what I did, and I told her about our work in coaching and assessments and so forth, and she started rattling off some things about assessments, and I got very intense in the conversation and realized, oh my gosh, it's Saturday and I'm at the theater. I needed to calm down. So anyway, I am very happy to be here. We're going to spend the first part of our time together really talking about self-awareness and the link between self-awareness and using assessments, and what we need to be mindful of when we're thinking about using assessments, in what ways they can support our coaching and the work we're doing with our clients, and in what ways we need to be careful, because we also do need to be careful. While we love the link between assessments and coaching here at MRG, we also know that there are some boundaries we need to manage and some things that we need to be careful around. I'm going to share with you a case study. This wonderful woman, I'm really actually excited to share with you. It's a great story, and it happened to be just a really great experience of using assessments and coaching. And it was one of those times where you get that coachee that's just really, really a joy to work with. So I'm very happy to share that with you as an example of how we work with our approach to coaching and assessment. So off we go. You probably know, if you've been in the HR space, the coaching, the consulting space for a while, that the last 20 years, assessments have really exploded inside organizations. Almost all things HR, from recruiting to development to performance, have an assessment component. So it's no surprise that coaching and assessment have grown a lot in recent years. And so we wanted to really just take some time to share what we've been learning about using assessments in coaching. And as always in an MRG webinar, open up the learning community so you can share perspectives, thoughts, and questions so that we can grow together in our understanding. So helpful to start off because I am looking at the folks who have joined us. I think we've got a wide range of assessment usage. So helpful for us to be able to guide the conversation in the right way. If you just share with us just approximately what percentage of your coaching assignments include the use of a non-interview based assessment. So where somebody is actually taking a questionnaire, it's being processed and you're getting a certain set of scores. So if you just take a minute and let us know if you're using them less than a quarter of a time, maybe up to half of your coaching assignments, you include assessments. Maybe it's more than that. Maybe it's your go-to and it's more often you are using them and perhaps you are only occasionally not using them. I would say for us, we're definitely in the over 75%. We don't always use them. And I'm going to give you an example of a coaching situation I'm in now where I've chosen not to use assessments. So we can, explore a little bit. What do we have? Nice. Oh, great. Yes. What a lovely mix.
Yeah.
That's terrific. So about a quarter of you using it, less than a quarter. So that's great. So we'll have some people who are probably have some perspective about using it less frequently. And then we have about 41% at the other end. So good, rich perspectives all the way along. So please bring your thoughts, your ideas, your questions forward because we have a nice diverse mix and it will help us all think about this in a more comprehensive way. All right, so let's go. So this is a simple framework that is helpful for us when we're thinking about how do you actually get somebody to grow. And self-awareness is the anchor. I know Lucy will roll her eyes when I say this because I say it all the time, but there is a great quote attributed to Aristotle, self-knowledge is the beginning of all wisdom. So I think we all know it's very hard to move a coachee forward in their growth if they've got significant blind spots, either about how they understand themselves or how they understand their impact on others. And then we've got to figure out then what is actually the work, because again, working particularly with leaders, there's probably at least half a dozen things anybody could work on to move themselves forward. So how do we narrow the scope? And how do we work towards the change? And then with practice, how do we work towards sustainable change? So that's the kind of general framework we use. The self-awareness space has been getting a lot of attention in the last 10 years. A lot more research is being done around this. And now most commonly, self-awareness is defined as a two-pronged construct. The first being internal self-awareness, which is I have a deep understanding of my values, my beliefs, my motivations, my triggers, my feelings, right? That I really have a deep, rich understanding of my inner world, right? And then the second is external self-awareness. I understand how other people see me, how I'm showing up through the lens of other people's experience with me, and I understand the impact that creates. So in the assessment world, we have, for the first, I'm going to say in the 1980s and up to the mid 1990s, even into the late 1990s, a lot of what was new in the assessment space and organizational life were some version of a multi-rater, or what's more commonly called a 360. So ratings with the person above you, ratings with your peer group, and ratings with the people who report to you. And so we'll send some of these links. There's a fair amount of research around the effectiveness of 360s for external self-awareness. Also, there's some good research about how when you combine 360 with coaching, it significantly increases the success of any leadership development endeavor. So that was very buzzy in the late 90s, early 80s when we were doing this research. But organizations were working a lot with this idea of 360, and still the impact of change wasn't necessarily as strong as they wanted. And I think that's really one of the origins of the growth of coaching, right? It's that we began to understand that you can't just change from the outside in. You need to have a deep understanding of self in order to make meaning and make use of your external feedback and how to understand your path forward. And the coach becomes integral in helping to integrate that internal and external self-awareness for the purpose of growth and moving forward. In the research of self-awareness, over and over again, we're seeing what strong differentiation there is between people who have high self-awareness and people who have lower self-awareness. We would highly recommend this HBR article if you haven't read it yet. Tasha Urich is a psychologist. She and her team did a meta-analysis of a lot of the self-awareness research that was out there and really summed it up pretty nicely in that article. And one of the most startling findings in that article is that while 95% of people think they are self-aware, again, self-awareness being both internal and external self-awareness, their assessment was actually 10 to 15% of people are actually fully self-aware in both that internal and external space. We've been in the assessment world for almost 40 years now. And while this is a big gap, and I think we'll need to see repeated research to see if this dramatic a gap remains sort of validated, but I think as coaches, we can all pretty much agree that there is a gap and that a lot of people are navigating their professional worlds much less self-aware than would be helpful for them to maximize their potential, to be as successful as they can be, and quite frankly, to be as content or satisfied as they can be. And as we've been thinking about this, we've been thinking about, so why is there so few people who are actually self-aware? And our thinking is this: if we look at internal self-awareness and we think about the families that many have grown up in, the school systems that many have grown up in, and the organizational worlds that many people are in, none of those systems in general are known for really cultivating deep self-reflection, deep inner awareness, teaching skills that help people stay attuned to what's happening with me, what are my beliefs, what am I feeling right now, where are my triggers. And then if we look at external self-awareness in the organizational life, we know that most organizations are not very strong at feedback. We've all seen organizations that give really abrupt, aggressive feedback, which can really trigger people and shut people down. We know that there are lots of organizations that give almost no feedback. And we know there are organizations that give some feedback, but it's often vague or conceptual or talking around an issue. And so when we look at the systems that we've come from and that we are in, it probably shouldn't be surprising that we don't have large parts of the population who have deep levels of both internal and external self-awareness. The good news, and there is good news, is that the research also shows that becoming more self-aware is very possible. It's these are learned skills, and assessments can help accelerate that learning and can teach us what to look for both in ourselves and around us. So, and I think why assessments and coaching work so well together is I think coaches can really help in this self-awareness journey in a significant way. So let's look at the lens of self-awareness through the lens of assessments. Basically, you can think of assessments as being in two categories: a set of assessments that are built for internal self-awareness, increasing internal self-awareness. So internal self-awareness is generally values and beliefs, motivation, personality, cognition in terms of IQ, but also in terms of some processing modalities. These are harder to change. We used to think you couldn't change them. In the 60s, 70s, and maybe even into the 80s, a lot of the common thought was that these things become hardwired in sometimes in childhood, sometimes in early adulthood. But since the advent of more biological research and more neurological research, we now understand things like how often our cells change over and how malleable our brain is. And so while we understand these are not cast in stone, we do understand that they remain a little bit more entrenched than things that are demonstrated more on the outside. So that external self-awareness are things that are observable, right? So in order for something to be external, our observers need to be able to see it and identify it, not assume it, right? So certainly our observers may want to take a shot at guessing what our motivations, our values, our personality, but the way in which we experience each other is through things that are very visual to us. So that's behavior, competencies, and skills. These are easier to change, easier in quotes, because we know it's not easy to change, but it's a little bit more malleable. Coaching, training, practice actually bring to bear changes in these areas. So when you're looking at what kind of self-awareness am I trying to bring about in my client, then you want in your toolkit an assessment, at least an assessment that will tap into that internal space, and you'll want an assessment that taps into that external space by actually going out to observers and asking for their observations. So when I talk about, there's certainly lots of benefits to assessments, particularly in the coaching space, because again, coaching is a deeper dive and it allows us to explore more than just a training program, even a well-designed training program. Oftentimes, the neuroscientists, when they understand coaching, they say coaching is like giving an individual a bonus prefrontal cortex. So that more conscious part of the brain that lets us think about ourselves more wisely and lets us make better decisions for ourselves. So it's like giving that bonus part of the brain. So the benefits of a well-designed assessment are the things I want to share. And one of the things that if you are looking to add an assessment to your portfolio, you want to feel free to really kick the tires hard and ask your provider or providers to document to you how it has been built and how they are taking care of it over time and how the science of it is proved. So I think one of the wonderful things about assessments is you really get to see more of the person, right? You get a deeper understanding and you get a more expansive understanding. And as coaches, if we have more to work with and the individual sees themselves more fully, then there is a richer path and often a better path forward. One of the things I really appreciate in a well-designed assessment, I have to just quickly tell this aside. When I started in this work a very, very long time ago, I actually started doing this work in 1985. I was really anti-assessment because the ones that I had come in contact with felt like an assessment version of that old television show, Name That Tune, where the contestants were be challenged to name a song with, just a few notes. And I felt like they were really reductionist and limiting. So it's a little bit odd that I now am the leader of an assessment company. But what I came to understand over time is with a really well-designed assessment, you end up seeing the complexity of the individual. You end up seeing what makes them unique. And you end up seeing, which I think is important and another reason why we need coaches when we're looking at assessments, is you see the contradictions within an individual. We are not neatly packaged beings. You will see people who have a lot of energy to belong and connect, but simultaneously a lot of energy to be independent and off on their own. You also see people who have a lot of energy to give and be generous and be supportive and really enjoy harmony. At the same time, they have a lot of energy to be competitive and win. So as coaches, we can help individuals really work with the complexity of who they are and the contradictions of who they are. We are working in spaces that are complex, in timeframes that are on speed. And when we use language, it can be easy to be using the same words, but meaning different things, which creates unintentional misunderstanding and makes it harder to actually do good work together, whether it's the coach and the coachee, or the leader and the team, or the leader and the peers. And so I think well-designed assessments create a shared language and a shared framework, which makes it easier for us to understand each other. I think one of the things that's, we do a lot of space looking at the cognitive bias space, and we're going to we believe so strongly in understanding about cognitive bias that we have done some work in that space. And we have a webinar that we're actually planning on sharing with you with the post webinar materials. So I think one of the things that's really helpful by having an assessment is we can see our clients as our clients and less through the lens of ourselves. I'll give you a quick example. When I first started doing this work, I had a strong preference myself for not being very structured, being very fluid, being very creative, liking things very kind of loose and open. And when I started coaching before I was using assessments, would assume that that was really a good way to go. And I found myself sort of unintentionally encouraging people to do that. Well, of course, fast forward a lot of years. I now, assessments help ground me in the person, not in the person through the lens of me. And that's been really, really helpful. It provides more objective measures. Cognitive bias is all over the place. And so when we interview people and we look at performance, we look at casual feedback, there's a lot of unconscious bias that can get, that sneaks into those modalities. So a well-designed assessment helps us be a little bit more objective. We all have blind spots. We see ourselves in ways that others don't echo, and an assessment, particularly a multi-rater assessment, can reveal that. There, again, as I said before, so many things that we can work on. I think it's really important that we have assessments that help us show the way forward. Again, I think that a well-designed assessment opens the field about who individuals are and gives them more room. And then finally, as I said, it outsmarts cognitive bias to some degree. It isn't a perfect elimination of cognitive bias, but it helps. So as we said earlier, there are some risks associated with using assessments, and some of it is about the design of the assessment, and some of them is about how we use them. So let's take a minute and see if you've had any of these experiences that your client perhaps has felt judged and the assessment actually shut them down instead of opened them. You looked at the assessment results and you're like, I don't think this is a valid representation of who my client actually is. You had a 360 and people said awful things. They rated them super low on things that were important, and maybe an open-ended question said awful things, or that the assessment was super transparent and you feel like, okay, this is not, I've talked to some of these people, this assessment results is not actually true. They're just sort of, we used to call it the halo effect. Yeah, everything's fine, everything's good. So let's see where we are in terms of what your experiences are with these.
Letting people get their answers in, because I think some of these are resonating, but we'll close it and share.
Yeah, see, it's really, assessments can make people really nervous, and 360 assessments can make people super nervous. And so it becomes, it behooves us to be careful about when we're introducing assessments, and also be careful about the assessments that we are introducing. So let's take a minute and talk about just a couple of things that we want to just flag about what might make things more difficult. So the first category is just be really, have really high standards about what you expect from the assessments, right? Because as we saw from your responses, if an assessment makes somebody feel threatened or criticized or misunderstood, we know that the brain is already negatively biased and threat sensitive. So they're going to shut down. That's not the place we want people for coaching. If questionnaires are too transparent, especially if questionnaires, it's clear what the right answer is, what good or bad is. Again, we used to call this halo and horn effect. I like this person, and so I give them all 5s on a 5-point scale. I'm really ticked off at this person. I'm giving them 2s and 3s. So you want something that is actually makes people think. we have to be really careful about assessments that reduce people to a letter, a number, or a color. It is limiting in terms of the work that we want to do. It's a reductionist way to think of an individual, and it doesn't give us a strong way forward. We also have to be careful about how assessment results are written, because if they're written too absolutely, then the individual walks away going, well, that's it. It's all I can do with it, and I can't change. And that obviously we're in coaching because we're helping growth. We want to make sure that the assessment doesn't provide an opportunity for people to provide unhelpful feedback. We want to make sure that the assessment provides materials that lead a way forward. Coaches are really busy now. Leaders are really overwhelmed. In the old days, in the assessment world, we would present data and a little bit of a description, and then you're off on your own. Assessments that have matured know that we need to go beyond that and provide support materials for post-assessment work. And again, we don't want things that make it easy for people to just say, speak from or rate from their biases. What is within the coach's control are some things to think about. You don't want to assess when the client is too vulnerable. The idea of an assessment, taking a questionnaire, and particularly a 360, can be a stressful situation. So you want to make sure you've centered your coachee before you move into the assessment space. Misinterpreting assessment data and not being fully prepared. Really well-designed assessments take a level of expertise and care. And we have seen situations where coaches, oftentimes internal coaches, but coaches or organizations basically just hand the report, maybe give a half-hour overview, and then off we go. And because our brains tend to be biased in that space, they're going to find things that they feel like are negative are more sticky. Over relying on assessments, again, not just, you can't just hand the report and say, talk to me if you have any questions. These assessments really require good interpretation, and they often require the ability and time to go back to them as more gets revealed in the coaching sessions. Absolutely have to be careful that confidentiality is very clear in the process, because from a developmental standpoint, the data should be the coachee's own. If you're in a situation where you're helping with a promotion evaluation or succession planning, if others are going to be able to see the data, the coachee needs to know that before they choose to participate. But from a developmental standpoint, it needs to be very clear, if it's just development, clear that the data is the person's own. And then finally, the thing that as coaches we have to manage is the participants discounting the feedback, particularly, again, observer feedback by, I know who said that. They don't really know me. If they really knew me, that they would have rated me differently. So that's important work for us to do as coaches, to bring the participant back to a place of constructive interaction with the data. There's a few things that just really either don't use a 360 or don't use any assessment at all. When the individual has been in the role for less than 6 months, really, we tend not to use 360s unless they've been in the role for 9 months. So same at the observer side. If the observer has less than 6 months experience with them, we don't include them in a 360. When there's really low trust in the organization, we use a self-assessment rather than a 360, because a 360 can inflame the trust situation. Again, when there's not clarity about who has access to the data. When an individual has assessment fatigue, I told you I'd mentioned this. I'm coaching a CEO right now who, during the selection process, they put her through a zillion assessments, and she had several in the organization that she came from. And so I started coaching her 6 months into the job, and she's like, I feel like overwhelmed with assessment data. So it wasn't the time to introduce new assessments. We've talked, if we get into a space where we want to uncover something that an assessment might help, we might bring it in down the road, but it wasn't going to serve her to do more assessment at that point. And again, the vulnerability piece. I think that, oftentimes we do assessments at the beginning of a coaching, but there've definitely been times where you wait a little longer so that the coachee trusts you. and that your recommendation feels safe to them, right? All right, so Luce, what do we got?
Yes, we have a couple of great questions. I'm going to do one that I think is just important to clarify before we move on, because I know we do want to keep our time moving. But jumping back to when you were talking about internal versus external self-awareness, can you talk just a little bit about the definitions of what you mean by behavior, competencies, and skills?
Yes. So behavior would be something like, how often does this person give feedback to others? So it's talking about frequency of something I can notice in another person. Whereas a competency is how effective is this person at developing others? So feedback is often something we measure in terms of frequency, and it's a more tighter construct. Yes, giving feedback, no giving feedback. Whereas a competency is written as a set of behaviors done together for a positive outcome. So effectively develops people. Whereas a skill might be effective, really good at giving presentations, right? Something that can be taught and delivered as a skill that is similar to a competency, but it's more things that you can check off with a narrower set of measures. It can be even in other roles. It can be skill with PowerPoint, for example. Skills are usually defined more as very task specific, whereas competencies are more comprehensive in terms of the role somebody fills. I hope that's helpful.
Thanks, Trisha. Yeah, I'm going to let you move on since we have a lot left to cover.
Great. All right, let's get into the case study. So this is Elisa, fabulous, 38 to me today. That feels very, very young. She's the director of internal communications for a large transportation company. She's been with the company for 3 years, and she got promoted to this role just about 8 months ago. So in their organizational structure, she moved from a middle management position to a senior management position. She asked for coaching after her 6-month review, which was, by the way, very good. But she's used to being always the top of the class, triple A plus student. And so she's used to being the most amazing person on the team. And so she was a little startled that she got what anybody would have considered a really good performance review, but it didn't feel to her like top of the class. So she wanted to do some coaching. She could feel that there was something she was missing about this, move from middle to senior. And so she wanted some coaching. Totally blessed to work with her. So really, going into this, I had two things. Of course, as a coach, right? I want her to feel encouraged. I wanted her, because she's pretty hard on herself, to really see where she was strong. And I wanted to help move her forward in a way that felt really invigorating to her. I also, when I coach and the organization's paying for it, I feel a commitment to the organization. And so I wanted her to be seen as growing in her effectiveness through the lens of the organization. She has a new boss, she has new peers, she has largely a new direct report team. And so I wanted those relationships to grow with her. And of course, we all want to make an impact so that an organization will think, well, if I have another coaching need, I'll go back to this coach who helped us out. So that was my goal going into this. So this will not be, this was my coach game plan, right? I do a kickoff session with Elisa, and then I have a 3-way conversation with Elisa and her manager to make sure we're kind of in sync about how we see the coaching. We use 2 assessments that I'll share with you. That I launched the assessments, and then I'm a big proponent of using research. We do a lot of research around leadership effectiveness. And when I really understand what the person is trying to do, we often have research, whether it's based on the level, based on the industry, based on the competency they want to get better at. We have research insights, and I almost always bring that into my coaching. We use generally a 90-minute debrief for each of the 2 assessments that we use, but we do keep going back to the assessments. It usually takes us 1 or 2 coaching sessions to really get clear on the developmental focus and to move to really starting to set up the action plan. What are we going to do? How is it going to look? Where might there be some risks? Where might there be some barriers? And in this case, we use biweekly coaching sessions. Our coaching sessions are biweekly, every 3rd week, or every month, depending upon the coaching assignment. You'll see, we revisit the assessment results frequently because, if you've got a 6-month coaching assignment, and that's what this was, how you start off doesn't stay static in terms of what's needed and what, in this case, Elisa experienced in, month 3, month 4. So we would continually go back to the assessment insights to help us find our way forward. I always recommend that when you have 360 data, you first thank your observers for taking the time to give feedback. And then you go back to your observers and not lay all your data out, but let them know, like, these are the most important insights that I've gained, and this is what I'm going to be working on, and this is what I would like your ongoing feedback for. So you create that feedback, that you keep engaged in that external self-awareness, right? You're building that external self-awareness muscle. Eventually, you have the wrap-up meeting, and so how is Elisa going to keep her focus moving forward, and what will her manager do to help her? So we start off with this beginning space, and for us, we use generally these 2 assessments are our focal point. We have a leadership 360 assessment that is behavioral based, that as a traditional 360, the individual fills out their own boss, peer, and direct report feedback. We're looking at behavior. This is frequency of behavior. The questionnaire asks how frequently you use the behavior by this 3-tiered option design, where we're asking people in a way that's neutral. So hard to tell what's good and what's bad, because we can't decide that until after we look at the assessment together relative to Elisa's goals. And so in this, they're saying what's most like Elisa and what's next most like Elisa. And they tell us most like Elisa 5, most like it with the options you've given me 4. Yes, a good second choice, strong second choice, number 3, the best of a second choice, number 2, right? So people really need to think about this when they're answering the question. For inner self-awareness, we really like motivation. And the reason we like motivation is a more multidimensional measure than some other measures of internal self-awareness. And motivation is malleable. So in motivation, it's how much energy you get from engaging in one way versus engaging another. And it first tells us where I'm going to be more or less drawn to. But because as adults, we have the experience of holding back on a motivation. So I eat just 1 sleeve of the cookies instead of 2, even though I want to eat 2. Or on of things that we don't want to do, pushing our way forward. So I don't really feel like getting out of bed today, but I get out of bed. Or I feel like actually saying something not nice to this person, but I withhold it. And what we realize is when we understand our motivators, we can use others of our motivators to moderate some of what might not be helpful for us in another motivation. So it gives us a lot developmentally. Same questionnaire design. So we are asking, there's nothing in here that tells them this is a better way to be motivated than another, right? So it actually makes people think through, instead of sometimes what we see with people is, well, I'm a people person, or I really like, I like creativity. It actually gets them to stop and think a little bit more completely about what they're drawn to. All right, so, we spend a lot of time, people have all kinds of different experiences with assessments, and we're making sure that before we start, Elisa and her manager really understand what we're looking at, why we chose these tools, that she's going to be completing the motivation assessment on her own, that she and observers are going to be completing the 360. And again, the confidentiality. She will share some things with her manager, but we're not going to hand the report over to the manager. And by the way, when the people that I'm coaching share with their manager, I'm always with them to make sure that goes well and to make sure that, because I'm the expert in the assessment, Elisa isn't, and I want to make sure she feels well supported in being able to translate those insights to her boss, right? So in this case, she had her boss filled it out. She had 3 peers and her 4 direct reports. So this stage, I've reviewed the research and it's time to debrief the results and to really work on identifying the developmental focus. In her motivational assessment, so this is the higher you go on each of these variables, the more energy you get from it. And the lower you go, the less energy you get from it. And so we had a great time going over this. She had lots of stories about where these patterns came from in her mind. But I will tell you, moving forward, what was really important to me was some of the things in that data is going to explain to us why we chose what we chose and how we were going to get forward in a way that was going to be helpful to her. This is her 360. Herself is in blue, boss is in yellow, peers are in green, and direct reports in purple. One of the first things that people need to get clarity on is your goal is not to have everybody see you in the same way. Your relationships and your objectives with your boss are different than that with your peers, are different than that with your direct reports. So we don't, look for complete alignment with everything. Some of the things make more sense to be aligned than others. I'm going to show you how we worked with that to come up with where we worked. We also included open-ended questions and just quickly some of the themes. She's just really seen as bright, hardworking, that she cares about others, she gets things done, and she's good at including people. What she does sometimes that can make it harder for others to do their best work is she sometimes is unclear, hard to read. She gets too in the weeds, which is often a big challenge when you go from middle management to senior management. And also another big challenge, she could delegate more. So what people were really looking and hoping was that she would give clearer direction. What do you really want from me? And clearer feedback, delegate more, and that she would be able to spend more time with her peers. She was spending so much time with her and, making sure the work got done a certain way with her direct reports that she was missing building those peer relationships. So when we look at doing the developmental focus, there are many sources of input that we can have. At this role expectations and organizational values, sometimes there are very specific expectations that help us figure out where the gap is and how to focus, because the context of leadership is really important. As I said, we look a lot at research. We look a lot at blind spots, those spaces where Elisa sees herself in a certain way that none of her observers see the same. The coachee's internal self-awareness and really understanding what's under the hood becomes really critical in deciding our way forward. And of course, we want the manager's input. I will say, though, in this case, the manager really thought Elisa was doing great. So it was a little bit more, the things we used for Elisa was the research turned out to be really important because we have research about what it takes to be great at one level of leadership and how you get to the next level and be great there. That's turned out to be really helpful. Her internal self-awareness, really understanding her motivation, turned out to be critical, and understanding her blind spots, where she saw herself differently than all others saw her, which, by the way, in our assessment, we generally see at least 4 to 6 of the 22 behaviors we measure with blind spots. So so much of this IDI was really helpful. I will tell you that the fact that she was very high on giving, caring, supportive, generous, kind, that she really cared about what other people thought of her. Other people's opinions really, really mattered. She was very high on excelling, which meant that she just always saw that she should be doing better. And then she had such a strong motivation to organize and to be structured. These ended up being really important insights when we worked with some of her data. So because we knew that she was moving from middle to senior, I grabbed that research. I use this research a lot because a lot of times we're coaching at a transition. And since a lot of the coaching we do is at the executive level, we're coaching leaders moving from that middle to senior space fairly frequently. And so we know that the number of behaviors that need to change from one level to another really increase in magnitude as you go higher in the organization. So having this data was really, really helpful. I spent time with Elisa really looking at her data relative to the things she needed to increase as moving into the senior management space, and the things she needed to back off of that were important at middle management, but not as important in the level that she was in now. So this really helped. It also helped, by the way, from a motivational standpoint. She's high on the variable we call interpreting, which means she really likes data. So this research was really helpful for her. We spent a good amount of time on blind spots. Blind spots are always, not surprising. They're surprising to people, like, how is this possible? So the first one was restraint is how reserved you are, particularly in your emotional expression. She thought she was pretty transparent, but as you can see, her observers experienced her as more reserved than she felt she was. She felt she was communicating a lot and really clear about her expectations. But it turned out really it was her structuring that she was feeling more than communication. Control is tracking and monitoring how much she was getting reports about how things were doing. She was much more in the weeds, and so wasn't using a more tracking and monitoring mechanism. She was using more eyes on the work to keep track of it. Feedback she thought she was giving, and her feedback wasn't, you're not giving any feedback, but she thought she was giving pretty straightforward feedback, and people were asking for more. And then finally, she didn't see herself as cooperative, as helpful, as accommodating others were. Because she's so motivated to give, she just felt like she should be spending more time helping people. And this was actually a really nice thing because she could relinquish that part of her story. So we ended up working with two different things. We ended up saying she really, one of the most important things for her to do was spend time being clearer about her communication, making sure people really understood, and really increasing this behavior. There's a lot of evidence in our research that in a whole host of competencies, and certainly moving from middle to senior, being very effective, clear, giving the right information is really important at that senior level. We also decided that we were going to work on trying to reduce how much time she was spending structuring things, organizing things, creating guidelines and routines and practices. That, again, this is really important at middle management, but less important at that senior level. And it actually got her more in the weeds and less time doing more strategic work and more collaborative work with her peers. And this is where we really had to unpack the motivational piece, because, lots of times when people are motivated by something really strongly, they create a narrative in their head that what they're motivated to do is universally important. So instead of saying, I'm doing all the structuring because it makes me feel better, she was saying to herself, I have to structure, otherwise things will fall apart, because in order to be a good manager, you have to be very organized, right? So you can see how the second narrative makes it harder for you to contemplate changing. So we ended up, doing a few additional things over the 6 months, but that's how we started. And so then we move forward with the action planning. And again, as I said before, as we have evolved over 40 years, we now provide a lot more information to people that support them moving forward. So action steps, ideas, starting point to actually give a menu of choices of how to work. We have a learning library, TED Talks, podcasts, articles, where people can get a running start about how can I at least have some examples that help me get there. So we really help people along. We also help the coach. Some of the things that I do is we do a little, almost like a book club, where I'll read it and she'll read it and we'll talk about it at our next coaching session, or I'll watch it and she'll watch it and we'll talk about it at our next coaching session. How can we use it? How is it helpful? Where did you really get excited? Where were you turned off? So we can really keep working on the specifics that will help her move forward. Reducing behavior, particularly if you have motivation associated, can be really challenging. We spent a lot of time on really working through what was happening for her internally and externally with pulling back on the structuring. So we do a lot of work in this space, and we provide resources around how do you back off of this space? What other motivators are you pulling on to draw you away from your motivation of structuring? What other behaviors can you use that help you be more effective at reducing this? In this case, delegation became a real key way for her to have structuring happen in her team, but not have her always be the architect of it. So, you know, this is the work, right? Your coach, she plays around, she checks in with the observers, you explore barriers to change. We did a lot of this work. I will give you a tool that I sometimes use that's outside of an MRG tool, which is Keegan and Lacey's Immunity to Change. We'll include that link. Sometimes when somebody's really stuck, I find that that tool is useful. Oftentimes we can go back to the motivational space and find out what the barriers are, but sometimes it helps to have a little bit of extra kick. So then, of course, you know, you are, as I said, you're using the assessments to keep on going. She did a great job at checking in with her observers. I know that's not always the case. And she's now in her post-coaching phase. She was, you know, she was a delight. So she does now have a little bit more time to preparing for key communications. She did a great job with some help working with the team to be able to delegate her structure. She has found that by being clear at the front end of communication, she was able to be clearer in the feedback, and that if you're clear up front, it's easier to be clear after something is done. We've done some work. I'll send Lucy, I would like to send them the mood meter vocabulary list. I find with people who are higher on restraint, increasing emotional vocabulary really helps. And she was really, she picked some words that were really helpful that made it easier for people to understand not only what she was thinking, but also what she was feeling. Her boss just was really, really thrilled, and actually very thrilled to be included in the process. And she's asked her, Elisa, not surprising, is now co-leading a strategic initiative for the organization. So this actually turned into some team development. I think sometimes when you're working with a leader and it works really well, you're able to do more work with them across the organization. And so the manager liked it. And so we've done some work with Elisa's peers. Elisa really wanted to do some work with some of her team. So, you know, it's when you do good work, it generates more work. I would say this is how we would summarize it. When you're thinking of yourself as a coach, I know people laugh at me when they say this, but if you were a Harry Potter person, and I was, my daughters are 32 and 29. And so they grew up with Harry Potter. So of course I grew up with Harry Potter. And there's a section in Harry Potter where the wizards get their wands, and it's this real pairing. That's the way I think about coaches and assessments, that you need to find ones that really align with your values and beliefs. And because that it really elevates your coaching, and it elevates what the assessment can provide. You want to please make sure you're asking your assessment providers to demonstrate to you that it's really measuring what it says it's measuring. Your world is busy, and you want to make sure that your assessment provider is there for you and providing education, research, tools that make it easier for you and make it easier for you to support your clients, right? So there should be, you shouldn't just be left with data and some words. And then finally, you want, this is our work as coaches, right? It's really working with people to be authentic, to be themselves, to find the best version of themselves, to grow. And so we want assessments that are going to support that goal. So, Luce, where are we?
Oh, so much activity in the chat. Super great. So folks, if we don't get to it today, I will have Trisha follow up, but we have time for a couple now. So one question, do you find that executives feel like they're too busy and balk at the time that it takes to do a 360? And how do you work with that?
Absolutely. Organization, everybody in organizations is exhausted now. We thought they were exhausted 3 years ago, and they're even more exhausted. So it's a little bit of how important is it for them at this time to do some significant work, right? If you really want to grow, if you really want to change the game for yourself, if you really want to find an approach to leadership that generates the outcomes you want, at the same time making it more satisfying for you to do the work, then let's actually get some good data and some good insight. And so I find is if it feels worth it for them, if that's the end game they want, then they'll might be doing it begrudgingly. But I have to tell you, I have never had anybody say this wasn't worth it. So there's a little bit of trust me, you're gonna get so much out of this. And assessments, good assessments tend to be the gift that keeps on giving. You go back to it, you go back to it, you go back to it, and it keeps serving your end goal, which is to grow as a leader. But fair, right? It's a lot of work.
So let's see, one more quick one we can squeeze in. Maybe it won't be quick, but so when people are promoted potentially before they're ready in like fast growing organizations, and how do you deal with the feelings of insecurity and people who are saying it's an assessment, I must be being judged, right?
Yes, full stop. I think that one of the things that assessments help us do is really highlight for people, here are the strengths. Here's what you're doing well. Here's what people value in you. Here's where you already have a running start, right? So I think one of the things is that we can do as coaches, given that our coachees' brains tend to go to the negative, is really show them the skills, the energy, the motivation they have to build on, right? So I think that's the first thing. I think the second thing is we only have so much energy to work on developmentally. So let's get some good data and diagnosis so that we can choose the levers that are going to give you the most return on your developmental energy. Let's not guess, let's not swirl. And then let's be able to be transparent with people about this is what I'm working on. So people know you're really intentional about moving forward. I also think sometimes when people are really anxious, I wait a little bit before I start the assessment process, or we often will start with the motivational piece. Let's get just a deeper understanding about where you are energetically before we do the 360. We can wait a little bit on the 360. So, we build up a little bit of, we have some things to work with. Build them a little bit more confidence and courage, and then they feel a little bit more comfortable going out to observers.
Awesome. All right. Well, I know folks will have to get going to other meetings. We have a lot of great questions. Do keep an eye out on your inbox for the follow-up resources. Trisha, if you just want to flip the slide. Yeah, we have some great things coming your way. All the research Trisha cited, which was so much, we'll have a ton of links. So this will be a very rich email, a very long email once I write it, but you'll have all that stuff coming your way. As far as future events, we'll add webinars and things to the calendar as we go, but we do have some certifications coming up. And we've already got the first half of 2023 planned out, and plenty of great opportunities to get certified with us. And again, we will get to all these amazing discussion questions in our follow-ups. So thank you so very much for joining us today and for your enthusiastic participation. We are so glad to have you with us.
Thanks so much, everybody.